It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I am excited to be joined by my guest today. Join me is Javaid Iqbal. He's the digital futurist, C-suite advisor on customer innovation, inspirational speaker, and an educator who has long been a longtime consulting executive with Big Five, a former customer engagement and success leader at Salesforce.com, and now co-founder of a digital transformation consultancy focusing on innovation in the customer space. So, Javaid, welcome to Accelerate.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
And I didn't butcher your name, hopefully, too badly.
You did not.
I was practicing.
Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. So take a minute, introduce yourself, give a little more depth about how you got started and how you ended up where you are now.
Absolutely. So interesting journey out of college. I was recruited by Ernst & Young in their consulting practice, focusing on Y2K and all those initiatives at that time in the 90s. And very soon I found myself sort of being asked to be, sort of recruited by other consultancies as well. PricewaterhouseCoopers sort of put the bill and came sort of running and getting me on. What was interesting was that when I was at E&Y, Capgemini put a bid to buy them because there were some SEC laws about consulting and accounting. And then when I was at PwC, IBM came shopping for them as well. So right. I said, well, this is an interesting sort of thing that's happening at that time. I then started some consultancies in the customer space and supply chain space and so forth. And interestingly, I was asked to start teaching some courses in the customer space, CRM and so forth, and reached out to Salesforce to help me sort of build a curriculum around the next generation of CRM. And as I was sort of talking to them, they came back and they said, well, why don't you come join us? And here we are, many years later, on to the next journey and to the next journey and to the future. Right. It's exciting.
So you said you keep referring to, you work on the customer side, sort of, and I'll sort of say digital customer transformation. So what are the biggest challenges? Because we're so often on the show, we're talking about everything from the seller side. So let's look at things from the buyer side. So what are the biggest digital transformation challenges for customers today, for our buyers?
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, customers are humans, right? And as things are evolving in sort of our day-to-day lives, we're relying a lot on technology, especially the mobile side of things and so forth. And that has changed the dynamic on how we learn and, more importantly, how we buy things. And customers have never had this kind of power in the history of industry, where they're armed and equipped with the kind of information to go and demand certain services. And as that situation continues to evolve, it's increasingly getting harder, and they keep, raising the bar for the corporations and the governments that, are innovating for them. Mm-hmm. So the consumption of this innovation, whether it's coming from a technology or a product or a service or that, is continually being tested by the evolution of, the humans in the space of technology as well. And it's staggering, it's exciting, it's keeping everybody on their toes as well. Right. And one example I always give on this is in my talks is of a 6-year-old girl, and this is a true example, a story that a colleague of mine had told us on my days at Salesforce. He was sitting in his basement doing some work on a Sunday morning, and his daughter came and sat next to him on the sofa and said, after 30 seconds of just sitting there, and said, "Dad, why isn't this TV turning on?" And he said, well, honey, you have to turn this TV on for it to turn on. And she said, no, it should know I'm here. It should turn on by itself. So what I ask my audiences and my customers is, are you ready for this 6-year-old girl to be your customer? And that sends some scary waves around, and it's interesting.
Well, right. And it reminds of the conversation or the newspaper article I saw that I'm sure lots of people saw about recently over the holiday season, where some child 5 years old or younger, I think actually 3-year-old maybe, her mother was sleeping, and she picked up her mother's iPhone and pressed her sleeping mother's thumb against the button,
nice.
the button of the iPhone, turned it on, and ordered like 16 dolls from Amazon. So,
Nice.
you think about how quickly they're picking this up, right?
Well, not only are they, so think about it this way: the consumption of technology is starting to become very easy in certain ways, and the security part that you're sort of marginally referring to is a whole can of worms that that's a long conversation in itself. But this 5-year-old, or the 6-year-old, or the 5-year-old that you're talking about are uncorrupted by Googling something and requiring an answer right there. But what they know is that it's very doable with just a few scans and a thumb and so forth. And they're embracing the digital world so much quickly because they haven't experienced all this in the physical world.
Right.
And the collaboration between the digital world and the physical world, where a lot of this is happening, is where the magic happens. And these 5-year-olds are ever so ready and are continuing to raise the bar on where people or companies would have to sort of meet them where they are in terms of their expectations. It's marginally scary as well.
Yeah, well, it is marginally scary, but you spend a lot of time talking about in your work, and you're working with the customer experience, the buying experience. Certainly, that was one of the themes of Dreamforce this past fall. Interestingly, so there's a lot of talk right now about, and certainly I'm one of the people talking about it, but I didn't originate this, is that we're seeing sort of a little bit of a pushback here as we, in 2017, looking out a little bit into the future, where people are saying, okay, well, maybe we've, I don't say gone too far too fast, but we really need to understand that there's really a role for a human in this whole thing, right? Especially between this buying and selling, the transaction right now, there's thought that we can automate so much of it, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's still a person making this decision. And so how are you seeing that factored into as people do this digital transformation? We've got these new generations coming up that digital is not a new skill, it's just what is, right, for them. How do we keep that, the sort of human aspect of it, integrated in all this?
Well, it's a very interesting question because if you think about it, people buy from people they like. It's a very sort of humanistic approach on that as well.
No, like, and trust is what it's called. Yeah.
There you go. Exactly. And, often where I see a lot of the salespeople that I coach and sort of work with, where they fail is they focus a lot on just trying to know the client. I know the VP of so-and-so, and I know that this and of so-and-so, and I golf with this guy and that gal, and so forth. But what they don't focus on is understanding that client's needs. Mm-hmm. And those are two different things, because the focus on just knowing somebody or a slew of people that would sort of maybe need your service or your product and so forth, versus understanding what their pain points are and so forth, and bringing in the right value. I mean, if you I always reference this recent book, Value as a Service by Rob Bernstein, and for the readers that have not, or your viewers that have not sort of ventured into that, I highly recommend that book. The adage is that you're not just selling a service or a product, you have to be selling value, and value sort of comes above execution. And where people sort of on both sides, whether it's selling or buying, they focus a lot more on the execution part, making the deal happen from a time perspective or a need perspective, right, or so forth. What they're not sort of seeing is what value, the overarching value, it's providing. And that's where the whole as a service or the subscription model has really blossomed, because it brought about a need for the nurturers, the success-focused individuals that were not just sort of going about and helping the customer experience, but they were embedding themselves into the success journey of the customer. And Salesforce, in many cases, even sort of pioneered this, or at least made it popular, where on the front end of a sales cycle, you'd bring in these success resources
Sure.
who would talk about the vision, the strategy, the journey, and even coach the sales folks on what is it better to sell, when is it better to sell, and how what you sell will be consumed. And if it's not consumed, it will not be retained, and hence you're going to have an attrition. So the whole cycle, from a humanistic perspective, requires some sort of supervision with value or success in mind. And I think a lot of sales folks that are sort of going about just focusing on making their numbers are not thinking the whole value part of it, which is where they're failing.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I was sort of thinking about your comments about Salesforce, sort of being the pioneer in this, and certainly within the space. But the thing that's sort of interesting is that, like a lot of things, that trends and things that are supposedly new or innovations that we see in sales these days, that really sort of a repackaging of what's been done before, but maybe done at a scale that perhaps was different. Because certainly the whole idea of customer success. I mean, I worked in a number of companies where we're selling large enterprise products to very large enterprises. And we did just as you said, right? From day one, we had our project manager as part of the sales team, right? Which encompassed sales engineer, customer success, engineering itself, whatever it took in order to help the customer navigate their way through their buying process. And so that when the order was given, there was this seamless transition to the success mode because that person had been integrated into the process the entire way.
Right.
And so I see this as sort of what we see today, which I think is really beneficial to customers as well as to companies, is making that available. We now have technology to make that available to a broader array of customers.
Well, I think, the process is never new. I mean, if you think about, if you, to your reference of repackaging, I think it's more reimagining than repackaging. And the reason I say that is that, yes, you had people, embedded in the sales cycle up front. They were project managers or whoever were making sure that, the sort of the sale happened. But the end-to-end, the entire cycle of when the customer was acquired all the way till the end of the subscription through a very mechanized sort of vision with metrics along the way that sort of guide you through the process didn't exist. And what Salesforce came up with, which I thought was brilliant, was this notion of an early warning system, where year one, if it's a 3-year subscription, every quarter or every year, you go back, your success people are focused to make sure that, all the warnings, which are, the usage of the product, against others, against people in, companies in your industry and so forth. And there were so many other aspects of what came to the early warning system and so forth were looked at throughout every stage of the process, and that ensured that the value that you had promised up front did not just disseminate or dissipate when you sort of let them go after it was implemented. In my way, the real journey begins then, because that's when they need hand-holding and so forth. So, embedding this up front, and I've been sort of going to a lot of these and talking about customer success globally, and even places like Dubai and Singapore, where a lot of these notions are extremely new. These guys are still trying to figure out, how this new technological advance in sales and others are going. And the value piece is a clear winner, in my opinion, that sometimes gets undermined just because they want to, sell a product or make a number by a certain quarter or the year.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, there is some reconciliation, I think, that needs to be done between the two.
Absolutely.
Between the two, absolutely. So, one question back on digital transformation of customers is, before I leave that topic completely, is also sort of seeing another sort of I don't know, two different forces sort of banging up against each other a little bit. Is, on one hand, we have this idea that of the buying committee, with some number of stakeholders involved, and that this is somehow a trend that is, embedding itself more broadly and widely in our economy, both major enterprises as well as smaller companies. And certainly articulated in the Challenger Customer book, which is an excellent book, by the way. But then on the other hand, I've been talking to more people recently saying, well, yeah, that's sort of true, but now we're seeing, as a result of these digital transformation efforts, we're seeing new people coming into the C-suite with very specific titles like Chief Digital Officer, Chief Transformation Officer, and so on, who are perhaps trying to position themselves as that decision point, as opposed to this broad committee. And people sort of thought for a while, well, less effort, less attention needs to be paid to selling to the C-suite. Now it seems like that's coming back to the fore, is that you need to spend as much attention now on the C-suite as well as with the committee, if maybe not more on the C-suite than you did before.
Absolutely. I think C-suite is being redefined. I recently was having a conversation with this CEO who runs this major distribution company. And he was talking about how he's hired a chief disruption officer to sort of see the trends across the industry and so forth. And, I challenged him. I said, in many cases, you are the chief disruption officer, you are the chief customer officer, and so forth. And, having sort of a committee to do that might not solve your problems. So I think what I'm seeing is, as the enterprise gets flattened, as roles get redefined, I mean, the adage that, we've been sort of going towards, that said that by 2017, CMOs will be spending more money on technology than CIOs, and we're in 2017 already. That kind of shows that the power of buying is sort of being redefined and redistributed, to your point as well. And while the chief digital officer may be a great influencer on where it needs to go rather than the chief information officer, that kind of leads into another theory I have on blue collar versus white collar IT. We can talk about that another time.
Okay, yeah, I thought we were going to jump into it. That's
but the procurement element sort of is being redefined, because now those procurement people, whether it's just a procurement function, has more bosses to deal with. You've got
it's being distributed,
influencer,
absolutely.
Exactly. So I think as sellers, they also have to understand that where the power really lies. I mean, if the vision of the company is going towards digital disruption, and the chief disruption officer is in some way influencing, if not just calling the shots only, then you've got more stakeholders to sort of get to know and understand their needs rather than, just one or two. So it's a very interesting time on both sides, buying and selling, as this thing evolves from one state to another.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of the chief disruption officer. I mean, that would be a cool job.
But the definition in itself and the parameters are hard to define, though.
Oh yeah, well, I know that's part of the beauty of it, right?
I mean, you could be a futurist and say, I'm the chief future officer. You never know that,
right?
But I was challenged by a CEO in front of a crowd once on sort of a mechanized way of going about, a digital strategy in the new stratosphere. And the question he had was, well, should I take a division, sort of, make that all digital and then sort of, replicate it across? And I said, well, you can't just do this and just replicate. It's a horizontal piece. And the more that you're already late to the game, if you don't have a digital strategy in 2017, well, first of all, that's bad news.
Sure.
You should have thought about this earlier, the convergence of industries, the convergence of physical, digital, is sort of where it's taken. And I call this the repeat of the Y2K syndrome, where the CEOs were like, well, what do we do with those 2 digits? Well, nothing happened with those 2 digits. But
Right.
what do we do with this new digital thing? And people seem to be confused in the overarching way, which includes even buying the right tools. And it's just the beginning, because right now, there's social technologies that are sort of confusing them and so forth. Imagine when artificial intelligence is completely embedded, augmented technologies. It's going to be a slew of things. The chief digital officer would be sitting pretty, because he'll continue to redefine the goalpost, and it's like, well, we'll see next year how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I was harking back to this time. To me, sort of feels a little similar, but different in critical ways. To, I remember there was this rush at the end of the 90s, early 2000s about, gosh, suddenly all this fiber was laid, and there's this big frontier, and people thought the future was unlimited bright. But then they reached this sort of just brief moment in time, and certainly I think somewhat caused perhaps by the turmoil in the financial markets, is like, oh my gosh, suddenly we had all this dark fiber. And people thought, we're never going to have to lay fiber again in this country, right? Because we've got all this capacity. And what'd that last, 5 years maybe, or something like that, before the future overtook it. And it seems like we're sort of at another one of these really critical inflection points, as you said, where digital is fundamentally, I mean, it's happened. We've seen it in industries, Uber and Airbnb and so on, but it's happening to the auto industry, right? This very capital intensive industry is becoming, if you don't have a digital strategy in the auto industry, you're toast.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the way of the future is, if you sort of start looking at, I mean, you mentioned Uber, and I talk about this often as well. If you think about one Uber ride or one transaction of an Uber thing that you do, imagine the number of industries that converge to make that one transaction happen. Mm-hmm. Right? You've got your finance in there, you've got the telecom in there, the high tech, the transportation, you've got so many others as well. So the innovation at the intersections of these industries is where a lot of this magic is going to happen, and the handoffs are getting tougher. So if you think about it from a salesperson's perspective, the buyer is continuing to become more and more needy, and you are continuing to play catch up with the buyer. And these social technologies are making it even harder for you to sort of catch up, because this is the first time in the history as well where the channels are the same. And we talked about this earlier, that the channels where marketing, selling, and service are happening are the same. I mean, if you think about Twitter,
sure.
Twitter is used for pretty much everything across the board, right, from acquisition to retention. And companies are still stuck with silos of sales, service, and marketing. And the lines of all of them are completely blurred. It's how do you define where a campaign ends and a selling happens versus a service happened and a marketing did not happen, and so forth. So it needs to be reimagined.
Oh, I agree. I want to spend some time on that, because I think it's made more complex by the fact of what you talked about, is that you're no longer selling in a silo either, in the sense that you talked about just that Uber transaction. There are several different impacts or industries are impacted that you talk about.
Right.
Well, you need to understand when you're selling that more often than not, and more than ever before, what you're selling is just a piece of something bigger. And you really have to understand how it integrates. And so you're selling something beyond just what your product or service is. And I think that's a real challenge for salespeople going forward, is to, it's hard enough. We always talk about these basic lessons about, lead with questions, don't open your mouth and just do your pitch and so on. But think forward a few years, as you talked about, where increasingly what you're selling is just a piece of an overall solution. And if you don't really understand where it fits and how it's going to add value to the overall picture, you're lost.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like in a marathon, you just set up to hand in the baton to somebody else, and they're taking it over. And it's the mechanism and the time that you handed that baton which will determine the the victory at the end. And it's changing the dynamic of how industry is being defined. I mean, the World Economic Forum is happening these days. The fourth industrial revolution is a big topic they talked about last year. And technologies are leapfrogging each of these sort of divides. And the piece that you talked about is getting more and more complex. Because if you think about where the customer wants to meet you or you to meet them is within a structure of a structure. I mean, if you think about gaming, where you're sort of, you've got the whole thing on, you're playing a game and so forth, and all of a sudden there's an option to buy something within the game, right? So you buy that thing within the game or within an app. It's an in-app purchase and so forth. So it's one piece leading to the other, leading to the other, leading to the other, and unless you've got the visionary mindset, and I call this the bartender versus the chef mindset, where, in a bartender situation, when you walk up to a bar, you just tell them what you're looking for. It's typically some sort of an alcohol with a mixer, and they sort of give it to you, the transaction happened. But the chef tries to understand the restrictions in diet, the kind of, meals that you're sort of privy to. Is it the right pairing of the wine and the palate cleanser and the whole thing? And unless you think about it in a chef sort of a mindset, you're not going to be victorious in this very sort of increasingly complex and very soon, which I call augmented selling world, not even the social selling world. The augmented selling world is going to be a huge can of worms.
So define augmented selling.
So I haven't read the definition on this or anything, but what I believe is that futuristically, as more augmented realities sort of kick in and augmented technologies come in, your buying decisions get automated in some way, shape, or form, and it sort of takes you in that direction. Recently read an article that there are a few companies that sort of help you, in your buying journey through augmented reality. Lego is one where you're sort of building the blocks and so forth. So if you sort of want to buy, Lego for a city or, one of the towers or something like that, it is helping you sort of frame your mind, help you, build the right pieces with the future in mind that, you've got to sort of leave some space for this and that when you're making this buying decision. It's like a connected journey, so to speak. So if you're not going to be looking a few steps ahead, it's the just in time, hey, I need this right now purchases will be sort of harder, because as this continues to sort of move forward, you've got to be foundationally ready and agile to be in a world where, like you said, you own just one piece as part of a bigger piece.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, when we're done, I'm going to be thinking a lot about this conversation. So, so last piece I want to get to before I go to the last segment of the show is you had talked about redefining sales, marketing, service, which I think is what, to my mind, one of the big trends coming up that people need to be watching for, because, yeah, in a lot of cases, it just doesn't make sense the way we do it. And I know, we've got this whole trend, account-based marketing, account-based everything, whatever we want to call it, that more closely aligns sales and marketing together and how they target and approach and capture business. And then you have the customer success part and, obviously on the retention side. But, I look at it from the fact of sort of it becomes more of a team approach to selling. Right now, we've got a model that's very much about sort of what I call the hero-based model, which is, sales is the hero. And are rewarded accordingly.
Right.
But, in the world as we're evolving, and certainly as you described it, and certainly as I see it, even in the account-based, everything or account-based revenue model, sales is not necessarily the primary actor in all cases. It's responsible for closing the deal. And it's a real challenge for salespeople. It becomes the challenge for managers as they look at how they constitute their teams and how they compensate teams in order to keep people motivated and involved. Is they're going to have to rethink, I think, the whole premise about how we pay salespeople, who they report to, what they do.
Well, it's interesting. To single out sales, I think it's interesting in itself, because if you look at some of these bigger deals that happen, it's got the fingerprints of pretty much everybody across the board, right? You've got your success folks and your services folks and your alliances folks and your leadership and everybody in itself as well. And yet it's the salesperson who is somehow responsible for the end all be all. And yeah, you're the quarterback, you're the whatever. But I think as the function in itself gets redefined, as these lines of sales, service, and marketing get blurred, and comes in the way I look at things on the customer acquisition and the customer retention piece, I think that just changes the game, because up until now, the adage has been on acquisition. That's where the salespeople have been paid for. That's where the hunting happens and so forth. But more increasingly, these hunting farmers are sort of bringing in bigger deals because they understand the value and they can bring the value in it as well. So the retention, which sort of helps you even sell more at the end of your subscription, becomes your sales team. So I think,
I think already at least I understood based on something I heard at a conference last year that someone said at the SaaStr conference, which is almost coming up here as we record this in January of 2017, but at the 2016 SaaStr conference, I think already at that point someone made the comment on a panel that customer success was responsible for more revenue than new business development teams.
Absolutely, because customer success is understanding the needs. They are in it. They're not just people who have bad status because they are there to sort of schmooze the customer. They're there for the whole year. I mean, think about it. So one of the things that Salesforce did, and I'll give you an example of it, was the whole concept of, an advisor for the cloud, a digital sort of a native, was so new that a lot of our customers were having trouble going out there in the field and finding people that they could hire as well.
Sure.
So Salesforce came up with a concept of a program architect that sort of is sold as a person for the whole year, which helps them sort of bring about the whole strategy. You've got a dedicated or a designated person, depending on which way you go. But during that 1 year, not only do you sort of handhold them through the process, but you also help them get the right person to replace you after you've left that could take the baton from you, from the customer side, and take it forward. So it's that kind of commitment, it's that kind of sort of deep-rooted focus that is going to be required going forward, especially in larger organizations that are sitting with these various types of systems. And the way I look at them, and I've sort of had conversations in length with the different types of systems. There are systems of record, systems of engagement, systems of collaboration, and systems of innovation. And people actually don't know the differences between them. Most of these big corporations don't even have enterprise architects to sort of understand that foundationally, are they even ready to take on the next level of digital innovation that they want to thrive on?
Well, I think, to your point earlier, though, I think what's really critical about that is that necessarily limits what sales can sell. Because if the organization isn't in a position to foresee and envision, what the next two, let's say they buy something from Salesforce, if they're not able to envision what phases 2, 3, and 4 are of Salesforce and how it could benefit them more broadly throughout the organization, whatever those facets are, you can only sell phase 1. But then who's going to sell phase
Absolutely.
2, 3, and 4? Well, that's your customer success people. That's your account managers. And yeah, they have to be extremely savvy salespeople. And
Yeah.
it's actually sort of interesting. It's one of the things that sort of an issue these days is, I think, is, okay, well, how are these people being trained to sell? Because it's a different type sale than your front-end hunter seller.
Well, and there's a different type of person as well.
Sure.
So people that signed up for success back in the day were the farmers. And now, sort of if you're, taking them from a farmer to a hunting farmer, that's a different can of worms. And, it's not a Salesforce specific problem. I mean, everybody's moved to the cloud, Oracle, Microsoft, everybody has sort of leapfrogged into subscription models for their products and so forth. So it's becoming an industry problem where you've got to embed yourself, understand the various aspects of technologies that are moving, and sort of enable success that way.
Yeah,
and that's a stakeholder right there.
Yeah, well, I think arguably you make the case that, and I do, is that, yeah, you're in enterprise sales, at least, your account managers have to be bigger visionaries than your people out trying to get the deal originally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's a partnership. I mean,
sure.
IBM does it well. They've got sort of consulting and the sales partners sort of going in together with, that kind of comm structures and so forth. And I think to your earlier point, the comm structure needs to be looked at as well, because if everybody's contributing to this sort of a bigger piece, and the sales guy walks out with a nice big fat commission, it kind of leaves a bad taste on the others as well. So
absolutely,
I think across the board, organizations have to be redefined as well.
Yeah, well, now I agree. That was my point about that whole thing about the compensation. Is that
absolutely?
Yeah, people aren't going to be happy in the long term if they're all working a deal equally and sales walks away with twice as much money. So just a heads up for sales. Okay, so Javaid, we have just a few more questions. I got some standard questions to ask all my guests. And so the first one is hypothetical scenario that I pose that you, Javaid, have just been hired as VP of sales at a company whose sales have sort of stalled out a little bit, and they're anxious to get things turned around, back on track. So what 2 things could you do your first week on the job that would have the biggest impact?
Well, I would try to understand the selling culture on how sales are typically done. Mm-hmm. And I think what I mean by culture is understand the various aspects of methodologies and processes and so forth that are being looked at. And the second thing I would see is the caliber of salespeople. Mm-hmm. I mean, are they chefs or are they bartenders? I'm very straightforward on that. In my opinion, being in sales,
I laugh because it's an interesting distinction. Usually people say, are they hunters or they're farmers? You're really the only one who said, are they chefs or bartenders? So I like that.
and someone told me earlier on when I was sort of helping salespeople sell they said there are three types of salespeople. One that needs your help, one that never know what's going on. Don't waste your time on that. One that don't need your help. They think they're the bomb. Let them be at it. There's a big middle portion. They need your help. Stay focused on that and make that victory. So I think, understanding the processes and understanding the people mm-hmm. are the 2 biggest levers. And when I say understanding, my way would be sort of auditing where each of them stand in terms of innovation, futuristic needs, and so forth. And obviously is what kind of product are they selling? I mean, if the product needs a lot of other things, that would be a third. That's a separate conversation in itself.
Okay, we'll come back. We'll have that one. All right, so some rapid fire questions. You can give me 1-word answers or elaborate if you wish. The first one is, when you personally are out selling your services, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
It's the relationship aspect. It's the smile.
Okay, all right. So,
one for me.
Who's your sales role model?
So, I have shook hands with a lot of big 5 partners, a lot of people at Oracle, Salesforce, many other places. The one person that singles out in terms of the smoothness and the way he exudes sales was the head of our region within Salesforce. His name is Dan Deegan. Call him Triple D. Fantastic person, one of the better sales leaders I've ever come across. A couple of things he does very well is a very laser focus on the customer, understanding the needs, big relationship guy, and a big picture guy. And I think that I've modeled some of my things on the way he's done things, and I think he's been a great person to sort of look up to, and I'm a big admirer.
Okay. What's one book every salesperson should read?
Well, I think given where things are going, and where I think I'm leaning towards, I'd say 2 books.
Okay.
Now, one, definitely read Value as a Service.
Right.
And if you're at it, there's a book called Customer Success. Recently came out a couple months ago. I would strongly recommend it. The passage, the foreword is by the president of the customer success at Salesforce as well. So fascinating read. It will help you understand where things are going on that front as well.
Okay. All right. So last question for you. What music is on your playlist right now?
Well, it's been a tough year for music industry. I mean, you've got a few artists that have sort of passed away and so forth. Right. But it's funny and old school enough. Last 2 years, I've been fortunate to see U2 twice. Okay. Thanks to Salesforce on that. They were at Dreamforce this year, and then last year we did a big one at United Center as well. So U2's always been the limelight of things whenever I'm down or whatever. But it's fun to sort of go back to the basics of my younger days and sort of take it forward from there.
Well, very good. So Javaid, tell people how they can find out more about you and connect with you.
Absolutely. So my website, javaidiqbal.global, has a lot of information about the areas that I speak at, the areas that I consult at, the areas I teach at, and you can email me at connect@javaidiqbal.global.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you very much. And friends, thank you for spending your time with us as always. And remember, make it part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And easy way to do that. So make sure you don't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Javaid Iqbal, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks again for joining me. And until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.